Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of In-Silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into something called ICH M15. Now, you might be thinking, ugh, another acronym, but stick with us because this one is actually pretty important, especially if you care about, how new medicines are developed. Essentially, ICH M15 is all about, trying to create this like universal language for how we use computer models in drug development. And that whole field is usually called model-informed drug development, or like everyone just says MIDD for short.
Yeah, you got it. And, before ICH M15, it really was kind of like the Wild West out there. You had all these different groups using computer models in their own way, and it just caused so much confusion. And honestly, it could even like slow down the whole process of actually getting new treatments to patients.
So it's kind of like everyone was trying to build a house, but like speaking different languages and using different blueprints.
Exactly. And that's where ICH M15 is trying to step in and like provide this common framework that everyone can use. And what's really interesting is how it brings together all these different like regulatory agencies and the whole pharmaceutical industry. It's like setting up these ground rules that everyone agrees on from the very beginning.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this like common framework actually work, in practice? Is it just a bunch of like theoretical guidelines, or does it give people like concrete tools to like assess these computer models?
Oh, it's definitely not just theory. One of the most important things that ICH M15 does is it gives us this really specific framework for figuring out how credible the evidence from these models is. And that's super important because we need to be able to trust these models, right? Especially if they're going to be used to make big decisions about like drug development.
Yeah, for sure. I imagine that's a really big deal for like everyone involved, right?
Yeah.
From the scientists who are actually like building these models to the regulators who have to make those really tough calls about whether to approve a new drug or not.
Absolutely. And ICH M15 really emphasizes this like risk-based approach to evaluating these models. Think about it like this. If you're building a bridge, you wouldn't need to put the same amount of like engineering and scrutiny into a small footbridge as you would into like a massive suspension bridge, right?
That's a great analogy. So the bigger the potential impact, the more rigorous the testing needs to be.
Exactly. If a model is going to be used to make decisions that could have like huge consequences, like figuring out the correct dose for a new cancer drug or something like that, then the bar for evidence has to be way higher.
Right. It's not like a one-size-fits-all situation. The level of scrutiny is really tied to how much impact those model results could have.
Right. And one of the key things about ICH M15 is that it really encourages drug developers to talk to the regulators early and often. So like developers can get feedback on their models before they even start running these huge, expensive clinical trials, which could potentially save like years of wasted effort and resources.
Oh, wow. That sounds super efficient. It's like doing a pre-flight check before you take off on a long journey. You want to make sure everything's in order before you even leave the ground.
Exactly. And speaking of making sure everything's in order, let's talk a little bit more about this framework for figuring out if a model is credible or not. ICH M15 outlines three main areas: verification, validation, and applicability. Now, those might sound a bit technical, but they're actually pretty straightforward.
Okay, I'm all ears. Break it down for us. What do those three things actually mean, like when we're talking about evaluating computer models for drug development?
Okay, so think of it like you're baking a cake. Verification is kind of like making sure you're using all the right ingredients and like following the recipe exactly, you know? It's all about like double checking the model's code to catch any mistakes, making sure the math is all right, and just like confirming that it's built built the way it's supposed to be built, like according to that model analysis plan we talked about earlier.
So it's kind of like making sure the oven is working properly before you even start mixing the batter.
Exactly. Then you've got validation, which is more about like testing the cake after it's already baked. You want to see how well the model's predictions line up with what actually happens in the real world. Like you could feed the model some data from old clinical trials and see if it can predict the outcomes correctly. If it does, that gives us more confidence to use it for new drugs.
Okay, so it's like doing a taste test to make sure the cake actually tastes good.
Yeah.
And isn't just like a pretty facade.
You got it. And then the last one is applicability, which is making sure you're using the right cake for the right occasion. You wouldn't bring a super dense chocolate cake to a summer picnic, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with MIDD. Like applicability means making sure the model makes sense for what you're trying to use it for. Is it using the right data? Is it answering the right questions? Is it tailored to this specific drug development project?
So it's like choosing a nice, light, fruity cake for that summer picnic. Okay, so these three things: verification, validation, and applicability. Seems that they cover like all the bases, right? But how does ICH M15 actually make sure that these evaluations are done the right way and that everyone is doing them the same way?
Right. So that's where this idea of technical criteria comes in. Basically, ICH M15 recommends that drug developers and regulators should work together to come up with these specific criteria for how they're going to evaluate a model. Like how accurate do the predictions need to be? What kind of data is considered reliable? What statistical methods are okay to use?
So it's not just about someone saying, oh yeah, this model looks good. There are actually clear standards that everyone agrees on up front.
Exactly. And by figuring out these technical criteria early on, ICH M15 is trying to avoid misunderstandings and arguments later down the road. It's all about making sure everyone's on the same page about what makes a good model and how much evidence you need to back up the model's conclusions.
That makes sense. It seems like all this transparency and collaboration would really help people trust these models more, especially when we're talking about something as important as new medicines.
Absolutely. And remember, the whole point of this is to make drug development faster and more efficient and to get those new treatments to patients sooner.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to see how ICH M15 is shaping the future of drug development. But I'm curious, are there any challenges or downsides to this new approach? Is everyone in the industry totally on board with these new guidelines?
Well, it's a good question. And with anything new, there's always going to be some pushback. Some people are a little hesitant, maybe a little worried about more regulations or having to learn new ways of doing things. But I think overall, people are starting to realize that ICH M15 is a good thing.
Yeah, I can see that change can be tough, even when it's ultimately going to make things better. But what about from the patient's point of view? How does ICH M15 actually impact them?
Well, that's where it gets really exciting because ICH M15 has the potential to really speed up that whole drug development process. Imagine a new treatment for Alzheimer's disease, for example. If researchers can use these computer models to get a better understanding of how the disease works and how a potential drug might work, then they could potentially cut years off that clinical trial process.
Wow. So instead of waiting a decade for a potential breakthrough, patients might have access to new treatments way sooner. That would be incredible.
Exactly. And it's not just about getting treatments to market faster. ICH M15 also puts a big emphasis on patient safety throughout the whole process. So by making sure those models are really solid and reliable, we're increasing the chances that those new treatments will be both effective and safe for patients.
Yeah. So it's this double layer of protection. Not only are we potentially speeding things up, but we're also making sure that all the decisions are based on the strongest possible evidence.
Exactly. And as we see more and more advancements in modeling, especially with all this new stuff with AI and machine learning, the potential benefits of ICH M15 are just going to keep growing.
It's amazing to think about all the possibilities. And it really all comes back to that idea of harmonization, creating that shared language and understanding across the whole drug development world.
That's it, exactly, by getting everyone to work together.
Yeah.
The scientists, the regulators, the pharmaceutical companies. ICH M15 is setting us up for a whole new era of innovation in drug development.
Well, there you have it, folks. ICH M15. It's not just another boring acronym. It's a whole new way of thinking about how we develop new medicines. And the impact is going to be huge, from speeding up those drug development timelines to making sure those new treatments are safe and effective. ICH M15 is really changing the game. So the next time you hear about a promising new drug in development, remember ICH M15. It's working behind the scenes to bring those breakthroughs to patients faster and safer. And that's definitely something worth celebrating. Until next time, keep those minds curious and stay tuned for more deep dives. This is The Deep Dive signing off.